Hi friends, we're back for part 2 of public relations. So let's talk a little bit in this presentation, there goes the PowerPoint, about some of the jobs that you can have in public relations. Now I mentioned in the last video at the very end of it that the industry of public relations, ironically, does not have terribly good public relations. A lot of the times we only see or we only think about PR in terms of crisis, in terms of something has gone wrong, and so here's a public relations spokesperson in order to tell us information about the thing that has gone wrong. And I mentioned that if public relations is working as planned, we don't really see it or notice it a whole lot. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that public relations does that we rarely ever notice. Also, if you're a PR major or if PR is something you've thought about maybe going into, keep in mind that these are all things you can do for a living in working in public relations. So one is community relations. This is largely hands-on work in neighborhoods and geographic areas, sometimes small towns, and is a type of PR utilized by nonprofits, right? So it could be that, let's say you work for an environmental nonprofit and there's a company that's going to move a factory into town, and you are concerned and people in town are concerned that the factory is going to put dangerous pollution into the atmosphere or into the groundwater. One of the things you can do in public relations is act as a conduit between the concerned citizens in an area and the company that's going to be bringing the factory in. So you are hosting events where you'll bring people from the company and the community together to discuss their concerns and talk through issues that may be concerning them. That is a very vital, important part of being involved in PR. There's also counseling. And what we mean by counseling is impacting a single person's sort of public persona or how they're seen, right? So if you have a public-facing CEO, director, or president, public relations can help craft the way that they speak. It can involve public speaking, what they speak about, the transparency of the message, etc. So making someone a better public speaker and a better public face for a company. This is something that is very heavily involved now in politics in the United States, and kind of has its traces back to the 1960s when Richard Nixon was running against JFK. This is in 1960 when Nixon would lose the election. He would come back later and end up winning an election later that decade in a very large political comeback. And one of the ways he did that is after the first time of losing, he hired someone to do counseling with him on public relations. If you go back and read your history books, one of the things that you'll find is that one of the influences into that 1960 election was the fact that it was the one with the first televised presidential debate. And in that debate, Nixon did not come off looking very well. Both his image, he didn't look great on TV, but also the way that he tended to answer questions didn't work very well on TV. And so by having these PR folks come in and help counsel him, he was able to put a better forward public face on when talking to the public. There's also developmental messaging and fundraising. This is incredibly important for nonprofits. Public relations helps build messaging needed to make money, which is crucial for nonprofits and underfunded organizations. So if you are working with charities or you're working with nonprofits where fundraising is vital for them, then this is something where you can help out. The NPR and PBS fund drives, when those are going on, those are largely the organizational work of public relations. There's also employee and member relations. So these are messages crafted for the employees and members of a given organization that can be to boost morale or to keep them happy or to let them know that their concerns are being heard. One of the companies that is notoriously good at this is Costco. Costco is very good at putting out information both for their members, the people who buy the cards and sign up for the cards to go shop at Costco, as well as their employees, and putting a good face forward to their employees about why it is that they're a better company to work for than some of their other competitors. Financial relations is a big part of public relations. We don't think about it a lot, but financial relations is very important. The messaging around a company or organization's finances. So this is public relations directed to the shareholders or investors of a company or an organization, and it tells them about the health and projection of their investment. This can go well and this can go poorly. If you are ever interested in stories of how this can go poorly, and if you're interested in this kind of PR and wanting to do it better, I would suggest a documentary called The Smartest Guys in the Room. It was about the ways in which Enron, a company that very famously got caught doing some pretty bad math with their finances and defrauding a bunch of folks back in the early 2000s. It was about how they utilized public relations poorly from a financial management standpoint. So it's I think on Amazon Prime, if you have that, and it's a pretty good watch. Government affairs is something you can go into with public relations as well. This used to go by an older, slightly less positive term, and that was called lobbying. And lobbying has a bit of a negative connotation. If we say lobbyist, we tend to think about it in very negative terms, but not all lobbying is evil. Lobbying is simply an action. It is trying to represent to the government a concern and trying to put pressure on the government to solve that concern. And it can be used for good and it can be used for bad. Like, remember back when we were talking about the how early investigative journalism helped the push to better regulate the production and sale of medicine in the United States. Well, the way that that actually worked is that the early newspapers would, in the United States, would run these investigative articles around turn of the century that would point out that these medicines were pretty much just made out of alcohol and cocaine and heroin. But people would read these articles, and then people would then push the government or write to the government about the need for better regulation. So that was just as much lobbying as anything else. Lobbying is not bad. Lobbying depends on, the goodness of it depends on what it is you're actually lobbying. Industry relations. This is when a single company is not just a single island. It's when organizations represent entire industries made up of similar jobs or professions. So one example of this that is near and dear to us here in Georgia would be the Southern Peanut Farmers Federation. If you didn't know that they're an alliance, it says right on their logo that they are an alliance. They're a group of farmers who have gotten together to represent the peanut growing and peanut storing and peanut processing industries. And so doing public relations involves them working with the government, involves working and conveying messages to everyday people, as well as putting good messages out for the rest of the folks who grow and process peanuts. Issues management is something that we think about a lot in public relations. This is the most commonly done form of PR by activist groups and nonprofits that deal with very specific issues. So, for example, the Innocence Project, which is largely about retroactively going through murder cases through the years and testing DNA. So murder cases that were done prior to the invention of DNA testing, to go back and test DNA to make sure that you've got, or you have not accidentally locked the wrong person up. So that would be a form of PR of reaching out to both media, traditional forms of news, but also reaching out to filmmakers, reaching out to people who are marketers, reaching out to everyday people and talking about the importance of what it is that they're doing. Classic media relations is a form of PR. This is sort of the old Bernays / Ivy Lee stuff we were talking about in the last video. This is what we think of as classic public relations. It's developing messages directly from a company or organization to go to the news media. And this is kind of where the rub between journalists and public relations folks comes in, is because the stereotype is that they end up sort of headbutting each other a lot. The public relations folks want to get their messages out there by the journalists. The journalists don't like feeling like they're taken advantage of. And the reverse of that, when there's something is happening, there's like a breaking news story, the journalists want access to the information, and the public relations folks are the ones who are in charge of getting them the info. And so the journalists don't like to feel like they are being intentionally kept out of the information circle. So this is where it can feel a little contentious. This has gotten a little different as of late, over the last decade or so, because public relations increasingly can send out their messages to the public without needing the news media. They can put stuff on social media and other platforms that directly reach the audience without journalism being that middle step. Next, we've got marketing communication. This is a blend of advertising and public relations messaging. And the idea is to build or change the messaging around a product or a service. It uses advertising tactics, but it's not really advertising. And the difference is how it controls the information that it is giving to the public. So just as a personal example for me, I used to work in public relations for a group called CORE, which is the Centers for Osteopathic Research and Education. They were a group of osteopathic medical schools in the United States, and how they would lobby on their own behalf for changes to medical licensing and that kind of stuff. So I was working for them, helping them develop some new messaging that would specifically go out to prospective med students, so people who were thinking about going to med school. And one of the things we wanted to be able to improve messaging on is that there was an idea that if you got an osteopathic medical degree as opposed to an MD, if your doctor is a DO, that's the degree they have, as a doctor of osteopathy. There was an idea, a sort of a stereotype that if you went to a DO school, that your residencies would be limited. You wouldn't be able to go where you wanted to go for your residencies. And so one of the things that I came up with the idea for with CORE, the group I was working for, was to send out this map, or make an interactive map and send it out to people. And the interactive map had these little dots. It's unfortunately been lost to time, otherwise I would show it to you. But it was a map with these built-in dots with testimonies from folks who had done their residencies anywhere across the United States, from South Beach in Miami to California to Seattle to New York City. And so by showing off these testimonies from folks who had done their residencies where they wanted to, other people would be more likely to get involved with DO medicine. Public affairs is an important part of the public relations landscape. This is all about showing that a company or organization cares about people. You know, you can't shake a stick nowadays without seeing a TV commercial that is designed to give messaging around coronavirus and COVID-19. Grocery stores have it with their sort of "we're here for you" commercials. You even see it with car dealerships where they're saying that they'll deliver the car to your house and you'll never have to go to the dealership to pick it up. One of the things I always like to point out is after a big storm, or after there is an event that interrupts the water system, you will see Anheuser-Busch usually convert some of their bottling facilities over to canning purified water. So the next time there's a hurricane, you'll almost always see that story pop up. And so why is it that Anheuser-Busch decides to start making canned water during hurricanes? It's because they know the media will pick up on the story and it'll make them look good. Event planning. This is the hands-on work of making special events happen, but always for a specific purpose, right? So, like, for example, if you're a video game company and you're launching a new product, a new video game console, which we are probably going to get those this year, then you're planning everything. You're booking the venue. You're deciding who's going to speak during it. You're going to decide where they're going to stand when they speak. You're going to decide how many people are going to be in the audience. You're going to decide who is going to be in the audience. Any sort of event like this is very fine-tuned or by the folks working in public relations. And then research, market research. You can't know how to sell stuff to people. You can't know how to speak to your audience and convey proper messaging to your audience if you don't know who your audience is. And if we want to connect this to the lecture from last week, we can look at New Coke as a sort of interesting phenomenon there, right? That they didn't really know who they were advertising to. They didn't know who they were messaging to. They were a victim of their own successes in their past advertising, and being sort of bad PR being kind of why New Coke failed. So with that, we have wrapped up some of the jobs and some of the things you can do in public relations that we don't think about a lot, that they're beyond just crisis communications. So I hope that if you are either really into PR and want to work in that industry, or if you're undecided or just sort of using this class to think about media jobs that you might be interested in, I hope that you consider public relations. Now that said, even though all of this has been about things that aren't just crisis communications. Your hot take assignment for this week is on crisis communications. There's 2 pages in the book that I've pointed out that are all about the things you have to do in a crisis, and I have posted a simulated crisis that involves our fake drink here. And so I want you to do your best to come up with a crisis response to a situation involving Eagle Claw Hard Seltzer. So with that, I will see y'all next week where we will talk about, I believe, media ethics, but I could be wrong. I need to check the schedule. All right, see you then.